Bruce DuMont back with hour number 2 of Beyond the Beltway, wherever you're listening tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. 1-800-723-8289 is the phone number. We've talked about a variety of things this evening, and some of those topics we may get back to. But again, John McDonough, an issue that is of concern to you, which is also on the front page of the New York Times, which I'm sure that happens frequently, is Brett Kavanaugh on the way to the Supreme Court. Obviously, he went through a great deal of publicity and negative publicity, and he made it to the Supreme Court. And now 2 reporters from the New York Times have come out with a story that said, wait, not so fast. He might have made it to the Supreme Court in a nefarious way.
Well, since
is that a good summary?
That's not a bad summary, and since this is a show about rumor and innuendo, we might as well talk about it, since we don't know anything else about it. I would say at the outset that when the original Ford accusation, Blasey Ford accusation came up a year ago, I did not have any desire to see Kavanaugh seated on the Supreme Court, but if he was not going to be seated, I thought it should be on the basis of his legal thinking, not on the basis of what he was doing sexually in college 40 years ago or whatever it was. And I'm always really reluctant to judge a person on the person he was at the age of 18 or 19. So that being said, I'm afraid really all we have at this point is the New York Times story and the accusations of this woman Ramirez, who raised her hand, I believe, a year ago when this debate was going full force, but her charges were not fully investigated. In fact, I think the FBI didn't talk to any of the people who could have confirmed her story. Anyway, what we're left with is the possibility, and this is only an outlying possibility, of if these charges of Ramirez are confirmed or to the satisfaction of enough people, then you have an impeachment movement against the Supreme Court justice, and I don't think that's ever happened in this country, for perjury, essentially lying under oath during his hearings. And that, of course, would raise, other questions of perjury. I mean, I think of all the Supreme Court nominees who have pledged their loyalty to stare decisis, and then once they get on the court, so much for that.
Can you tell us what stare decisis is?
Stare decisis is respect for court precedent, a historic precedent. And that's really, I don't have anything of great substance to say about the Kavanaugh situation at this time, because there's really no information.
I think the rumor that Democrats are gracious losers is probably a false one at this point, clearly. Again, where was this during the hearing? If it was a credible charge against Kavanaugh, and it was something that supposedly people were trying to bring to the Senate Judiciary Committee, do we not think that Senator Feinstein's staff wouldn't have been all over it and would have made it a bigger issue?
Well, there were so many restrictions put on that brief period of FBI investigation.
No. I think my theory about all of this is this. Why is this coming out now? Why? With him already... I think the reason is that we are not hearing certain things about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's health, and there is probably a growing concern that her time on the Supreme Court is growing very, very short. And because of that, they must undermine the credibility of the most recent nominee so that President Trump isn't able to nominate a replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
They've got to stir up the pot before the story becomes debatable.
Right, and to your point, Molly Hemingway wrote a great book, Justice on Trial, which talked about the smear campaign, the organized smear campaign against Kavanaugh. And it was really disgusting what the mainstream media and their allies did. The New Yorker ran the Ramirez story when it was unconfirmed. There's still not much more to it there. All of this has been aired. But I want to say this, just like I've said with regard to impeaching Trump, if the Democrats want to go for it, by all means, do it. Because you know what? The whole Kavanaugh thing backfired on them. They lost probably 3 Senate seats because of that. They had all the momentum in the House, but in the Senate, Claire McCaskill, Heidi Heitkamp, and at least one other senator who came out against who came out against Kavanaugh did not fare so well in very contested
Donald.
races.
Well, it was the closest to confirmation vote, I think, in history for a Supreme Court
Well, we're a
nominee.
divided country. Hello.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
so it's, everything is divided.
Yeah, until recent years, it used to be, unless there was something really serious, in which case the candidate would withdraw. No, overwhelming majorities of the Senate would vote for a Supreme Court
any case, if
candidate
there is a
for the
liberal-
public good, because it was in the public interest.
And
a good
Republicans have
term to
done
keep
that.
in mind nowadays.
If there is a liberal vacancy on the court next spring, obviously we're all safe because the McConnell rule will be enforced, right?
You think so?
But let's
not.
look at how
John, you want to bet on that?
let's look at how Republicans have treated Democratic nominees. I think Elena Kagan got in with like 66 votes or 68 votes or something like
Sotomayor
that.
or similar.
Sotomayor was very similar, but it's the Democrats who are really, they are so concerned about abortion that they're going to do anything to undermine any nominee. It doesn't have to be Brett Kavanaugh. Look, Neil Gorsuch was a very close vote. I think it was maybe 2 more votes than Kavanaugh.
Also, the other point is that, this was a big story a year ago. A book is coming out now. I mean, if I am the editor of the New York Times, I want to know why 2 of my reporters are writing a book about a subject that they didn't report in the New York Times. I mean,
I can't
because
answer that
the
one.
story here is that the FBI didn't do a thorough investigation. They were supposed to do a thorough investigation when the Democrats were demanding it. Everyone was surprised that the report came back so quickly. I think a lot of people probably questioned how
There's a lot of pressure on them.
a lot of pressure on them, but I mean, they did sort of exonerate him at that particular moment, and it was rather quick. So now the question is, these are stories that came out and should have come out then, but I can't believe that some of the reporters, Ryan Farrow, I mean, I can't believe that he would not have been doing some follow-up stories, that we would have not have to wait a year for another shoe to fall on this case, because this was one of his early this was one of his stories.
We'd have to look at the editorial review process that was in place at the Times. I mean, maybe the story was submitted and editorial hierarchy had a different opinion.
John, you are a true believer in truth, justice, and the American way, as you have defined it. You love the New York Times. Do you understand why so many people in this country of a different political persuasion question the accuracy and the integrity of the New York Times?
I wrote for the Wall Street Journal for over 20 years. So I mean that's. They're both great papers, and you divide every great paper. It's divided into an editorial, opinion, and a hard news segment. There's a wall between, and I think I would trust a Wall Street Journal, a piece of Wall Street Journal journalism as quickly as I would trust a New York Times or Washington Post or a Chicago Tribune piece of journalism.
We got to pause. We'll hear from the other side when we come back. 1-800-723-8289. I'm Bruce DuMont. Thanks for joining us.
Than the Democrats.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. I want to read a quote from the president. This is on the burning of the oil fields, the attack on the oil fields. And he said this afternoon, I'm going to read this right from my phone with my glasses, so pardon me. There is reason to believe we know the culprit, are locked and loaded depending on the verification, but we are waiting to hear from the kingdom as to who they believe was the cause of the attack and under what terms we would proceed, end of quote. So the president is basically saying that the United States is locked and loaded, but basically they're waiting to hear from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as to how Saudi Arabia thinks that we should respond and who they think is responsible. And again, he didn't address Secretary of State Pompeo. He addressed the issue of that he didn't believe the Yemenis sources who said that they were responsible. He dismissed that, went right to Iran, pointed the finger at Iran, and now the president is saying that he wants to talk to his buddy over at the kingdom to find out who they believe was responsible. I guess my question, because we talked about whether or not there would be U.S. military response to this, and in the first hour, nobody seemed to think that there would be that. At least, Art, you didn't believe that.
The ball is still in the air.
The ball is still in the air. But my question to you, begin with you, Art. Do you, how strong is Saudi Arabia? I mean, I think most people listening to the show know that the United States sells an awful lot of armaments to Saudi Arabia, has for decades. I mean, is Saudi Arabia strong enough to fight its own battle if they were to decide to retaliate against Iran or Yemen or whoever they decide is responsible for this? It's their property.
I think we should fight our battles, and we should leave it to other nations to fight theirs. Any kind of response of consequence against this attack should be one that's orchestrated with allies, ideally the UN. To give you a straight answer, Henry Kissinger said once that Saudi Arabia isn't a country. It's a very large, rich family surrounded by a lot of sand and some citizens and foreign workers and a lot of armaments, also hired mercenaries. Their pilots performed extremely well during the first Gulf War. But it's a country that's very vulnerable, and their insecurity is a big reason why they've funded extreme Islamic madrasa schools, other extreme groups around the world. I'm not saying they're directly supporting terrorism, but we sure as hell should not let Saudi Arabia or any other country dictate American foreign policy.
Does it sound like that's what the president is doing with the quote that I just read?
Well, I think the president should speak for himself, and he often does. I do think one reason why Eisenhower looks better and better all the time is because he was quite aware of the power of his office, effective at using it, and he didn't sound off all the time. That's the way to be a president of the United States and succeed.
If Iran decided, if Saudi Arabia decided that they wanted to pursue that they figure out who they think the culprit is, who would they bring to their side in a military battle, in your view, Nick Calm?
Who would the Saudis bring?
Yeah, who I mean, the Saudis, as Art said, they're a country, but they're a large family. Who would they bring? I mean, who would help them fight their battle against Iran if they too believe that it's Iran?
Maybe Jordan, maybe Egypt, maybe Iraq even. Again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And of course, there is a U.S. role to play there. But I mean, I have to say, and again, I've been pretty vocal on both supporting and critical of Donald Trump. When I hear this locked and loaded thing, I think there is as much chance of me riding the winning horse at Arlington as there is us taking any military action against Iran.
I agree with Nick, because this is not what he ran on, and this is not what his base wants. He dismissed Bolton. He got rid of that wing of the party, and this would be a betrayal of what he ran on. So I don't see him doing it. I agree with Art. I mean, the Saudis were the ones attacked. Let them handle it.
John.
I have no real thought on that. I suspect that the United States and NATO would probably become involved if there was a willingness to do it. But I don't see the willingness to do it.
No. Not
This
in
isn't
NATO.
an attack on a NATO ally.
No.
Well, it's no, that's true.
I'm not even sure
But
we
it
would do anything if there were an attack on a NATO
It
ally.
could threaten, NATO oil supplies theoretically.
Yeah, but NATO is basically the U.S. The president's
I know,
right
exactly,
about that. I mean, we're
exactly.
the ones who spend the money, and I'm tired of spending money. As a taxpayer, we all should be tired of it. I mean, it is. Let these other countries defend themselves.
Let's call Bolton and ask what he thinks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew, get John Bolton on the line, will you?
The next show.
Let's go to Don. By the way, we don't have John. We have Don. It's the closest thing we could do. Don is in Austin, Texas, listening to us on one of America's great talk radio stations, KLBJ. Don, go ahead. Let's hear from Texas tonight.
Anyway, I was just thinking, who benefits, or Quay Bono, who would be benefited in an attack? and I'm getting a kind of echo here. Anyway, it seems like it would not benefit Iran.
Right,
And they may be being set up like it apparently could have been with the supposed torpedoing the boats, and the West Texas crude has been at a low price recently, and it's at a point where they may impact their industry. And I know they didn't do it though.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, let's thank you for bringing that up. We're going to discuss that. We touched
Okay.
on it earlier in the show, but I want to start the discussion. We'll start with you, Josh. Who is the winner and who is the loser in this? Because we talked in the first hour. We talked about why would Iran do this? I mean,
Right.
the Pompeo thinks that Iran did it. Why would Iran do it, and why would they do it now?
I mean, the only thing that I can think is that they want to show that they're a strong country, given that the Trump administration has been so effective in crippling their economy. That's the only thing that I can think. They want to show strength.
And then why would they be doing it anonymously then? That's the question.
Again,
Yeah.
that's a good response.
They want to
that
keep the
I don't have-
ambiguity in the air?
Right. I don't have the answer for it, and
Yeah.
I'm not coming on the show and stating that I
Yeah,
think
nor
Iran
do
did
I.
it. I
No.
think we need to investigate this.
No.
And
But again,
certainly-
if Iran did do it, and I'm not so sure they did do it, could one of the reasons be that they know what you just stated? Donald Trump said that he wants to get troops out of the Middle East. He doesn't want more troops in there. He is against the previous administration's
Right.
policies towards sending in troops in that region of the world. So he doesn't want to do that. Is this a way that Iran may want to force him?
Sure.
Well, they want to see how far they can push him, because at a certain point, Donald Trump might be viewed as a paper tiger. Again, especially if he's saying locked and loaded to his right wing, and then he does nothing.
It puts
says-
him in a politically perilous situation,
Yes,
and maybe the
makes him
Iranians
look weak.
want to do that. Maybe that's the reason.
Why wouldn't they want to do that to him? Make him look weak.
Yeah. Well, I could see that being a reason, that they want to make him look weak because they don't like Donald Trump. And they,
And I'm not convinced the Iranians don't want war. I mean, again, they have been under siege for a long time. You know, if the mullahs want to hold on to power, one of the best ways to do that, the same way people talk about wag the dog in this country, right? If you want to hold on to power, you go to war.
Art Sear, your response.
I thought no,
A
I
lot of
agree.
Machiavellian thinking here, but what's
Yeah.
going on here?
It's speculation. Let's wait and see what kind of evidence can be produced. I think, as mentioned before, it's imperative for the administration to produce some evidence if they're going to make specific accusations. And it's incumbent on the Secretary of State to do so.
Does the use of drones signal to you that one side of this story or not? Are drones, obviously we know we use drones in that region. You know, there are conspiratorialists out there right now saying maybe we did it.
Yep.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying
Anybody can use a
conspiracy these
Yeah.
days, and the use of drones. What does the use of drones in this case? Because obviously it has a significant economic impact. What does it say about the general use of drones in warfare, even homeland security? Are we into a whole new area of worrying about drone attacks even in the United States?
So I would say this is that Obama really introduced drones, and I don't blame him for that. I mean, we were a war-weary country at the time he entered office, and a lot of the attacks that he carried out were with drones. But that's the world we live in now, and who knows if some of these drones have fallen into the hands of terrorist organizations. As we said earlier during the first hour, we don't know. It's not like Pearl Harbor where we know it was the Japanese. We don't know what country did this. It could be a terrorist group, for all we know.
Right.
And it's scary when you think about drones falling into the hands of terrorist organizations.
But
Let's
it
go
is-
to
it
Jay
is-
in Wilmington, North Carolina, listening to us on the YouTube. Go ahead, Jay. Are you there? Jay, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead. We've only got about a minute for you. Go ahead.
Okay, the reason that Iran attacked Saudi Arabia, I'm getting an echo here, but
That's okay. We're hearing you.
Um, they did it to increase the price of oil in the spot market because we got all kinds of sanctions against them. That's the reason they did it. I'm like, hang on.
Okay.
All right.
Do you agree with that?
It was a financial
It
maneuver.
was a financial maneuver.
Well, I mean, they still depend, even though a lot of their resources have been frozen, they still depend on oil as a big part of it.
Right,
If,
yeah.
if it's correct that this is going to drive up oil prices, that could indeed be a part of the motivation.
It could be, but we just don't know enough at this point.
When we come back, we've touched a lot of hot topics. When we come back, we're going to talk about gun control. Back shortly. Bruce DuMont back, and I want to go back to a discussion that we had about 20 minutes ago. We were talking about the Democratic primary debate, and we were talking about those that had to sort of fight their way and claw their way into the top three. We talked about that Castro slipped badly. We talked about whether whether he built himself up. And I want to just talk from a political standpoint in this Democratic field. Did Beto O'Rourke help himself with his very out there position on guns?
I think in this Democratic
Yeah.
field, absolutely he did.
Yeah.
But as I said before, he did a great disservice to the Democratic Party generally by exposing their true feelings about taking away guns.
Art, what about you?
Well, like I said before, I don't think it's going to be a principal issue in the campaign, either the primaries or the general election.
Guns? Guns or not?
Guns? No, I don't think so. Compared to others, it is a highly emotive issue, and in both parties today, you've got the basic challenge that you have to get through a bunch of zealots and activists on the left and right, respectively, and then appeal to the middle.
As you look at the Democratic
it's a
field,
primary
is
challenge for any ultimately successful nominee.
the only person in that field that you're comfortable with, and I don't mean that you're going to vote for him, would be Joe Biden, because at least he has some experience in foreign affairs, which is near and dear to your heart?
No, I don't have that bias. I said earlier that I think he's electable and more electable, but as it's also been pointed out, we'll have to see what the primaries indicate. No, is it because I'm an older person, Bruce?
No,
that you
but
think
but
am I stumbling on the air?
the primary
My
voter, by the way, a younger
I'm just
listener
kidding.
just called and chided me for using the term the YouTube. It's YouTube. It's not the YouTube.
YouTube.
Well, of course. You didn't
Smart
know
ass.
that?
Millennial.
Every
You'll be old too someday.
Get off my lawn.
Get
Every-
off my lawn.
Every customer is valuable for every listener is, yes, important.
No, but does it bother you that foreign policy has not been part of this
it
big
bothers me
debate
a
at
lot.
all?
By contrast, speaking of young people, they're so audiovisual. I embrace that, but I get even in teaching by showing old films and old videos. Executive Suite, a classic from 1955, which addresses gender relations, among other things, and the
Robert
influence
Wise at
of
his
women.
best.
Patton, and also the first Kennedy-Nixon debate. I have a VHS tape, thanks to Bruce DuMont, but you can also find it
That's
on
right.
YouTube. They're both very good. Now, occasionally a group of young people will be swept off their feet by Jack Kennedy, but most classes think, wow, they're really terrific. Two grown-up men, they don't blow kisses at each other, they don't insult each other, because they wouldn't have gotten elected if they did. They talk in depth about serious issues. Now, Nixon does...
And the questions were better.
Absolutely, but also biased.
Yes.
And this gets to the point. Thank you for that opening. They were supposed to be talking about domestic affairs. And Jack Kennedy shamelessly kept bringing up the Soviet Union. They're going to bury us. They're way ahead in science, technology, missiles, space. And Nixon looked irritable and resentful, as he often did. In this case, he kept politely trying to get the debate back on track, and none of the shamelessly pro-Kennedy reporters, the four on the panel, would actually make that point. It shows how dominant foreign policy was. in those days. It's also important to remember that the Soviet Union is gone. Japan was taking over the world in the 80s. They're a very important economy and ally of ours, but nobody discusses them that way anymore. So our current demonization of China should be seen in perspective.
There was
But
one
thank you
little-
for
Go ahead.
asking.
There was one
That was a-
little dissection from that first debate that a lot of people have forgotten.
Please.
And it surprised a lot of people. It seemed to take the media by surprise and even the candidates by surprise. China was at that time sending some shells, doing some bombing, offshore bombing of Quemoy and Matsu, two little islands that were basically just piles of rock. And the question arose during the debate, what would your response be to Chinese bombing of Quemoy and Matsu? Well, Nixon, being Nixon, jumped in and said he'd go to war to defend Quemoy and Matsu. Kennedy was much more measured, much far less committal. And nobody really expected this question to come up, and for the next several days, it was a subject of considerable debate in this country. And Nixon ultimately pulled back, realizing that those things were not worth going to war for.
During one of the breaks, our Republicans were saying some interesting things, saying nice things about Elizabeth Warren. I want to give you a chance to put that on the record, because it's not in the context that you would vote for her, but in this field of Democrats, 10 plus, you gave her high marks.
I think she's done remarkably well since the whole I'm a Native American scandal seemed to be derailing her. She recovered from that. She's been campaigning vigorously. She's been steadily moving up in the polls. I definitely think she has a significant shot to be the nominee. She's going to have Bernie Sanders drop out or really stumble badly for that to happen, because otherwise I do think Biden still is the nominee. But she is a formidable campaigner. If she gets the nomination, she will be very formidable against Donald Trump, because she's a fighter like he is. And I think if, from my point of view, God forbid she wins, kiss the economy goodbye.
Okay,
Yeah.
Josh.
On Nick's latter point, 100% agree. I think her ideas are crazy, but she is actually surprised me quite a bit. She is vigorous. She is out there. She's got policy positions, and she is really taking a lot of the Sanders support, but other candidates' support, and has shot up in the polls big time. From just the basic intelligence level, her versus Biden, I mean, it's like night and day. She is able to articulate ideas in clear sentences. She's able to respond quickly. She's got a quick mind. He doesn't. So I think if it comes down to her and Biden, I could see her prevailing.
Why does I think the $64,000 question here is, why would Bernie Sanders drop out? I mean, that's the issue, because, again, if one of them drop out, they could become the nominee. They could be propelled mathematically to be it, or someone else emerges as a stop,
I don't see
Biden
that happening.
candidate.
Do you?
I don't see it happening now, but again, as Art pointed out earlier, we're way ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
The first primary hasn't happened. We have to see. Ultimately, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which is the dominant wing, is going to have to decide, I think, who out of those two they want. Because otherwise, as Nick has pointed out, Biden could sneak in, even though he's just so, ill-equipped to be the president of the country, probably to be the president of, or the mayor of a small town. I mean, this man is not up for the task.
Well, there again, if Biden does end up being the nominee, we all agreed earlier that the vice presidency would be a key, really a key thing.
Yeah.
He'd have to be, in effect, protected by a strong vice presidential
But
nominee.
vice presidential candidates have never really moved the needle in general elections. I mean, that's been studied, and that's been prevailing
Yeah, but it's
wisdom.
never happened with someone who is as old as Joe Biden. That's the other question.
They can move the needle down.
Yes.
They
That's
can
true.
move the needle down.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So I think
arguably, Kennedy...
the problem is, I would say that Klobuchar is in a position to be a Joe Biden running mate.
Yes.
But she might be too moderate. The hard lefties might demand a stronger candidate or a person of color.
Right, and
Because, again,
Stacey
you've got-
Abrams is pretty much all but running for vice presidency in
Yeah,
a
and I
solo
don't-
primary.
I don't know how you go from a
Dan
losing
Quayle
candidate.
certainly hurt Bush. Excuse me, it's a really important point, and Bob Dole, arguably, especially in his ugly
Put
vice presidential debate
Bush
in 76,
where?
76, Bob Dole really helped sink Gerald
And
Ford.
Palin, of course, didn't help McCain. But on just on looking at the other side, do you think Lyndon Johnson moved the needle on behalf of JFK in
Yeah.
1960?
absolutely.
I think
Sure.
that's the
Absolutely.
one
Sure,
where it
yeah.
may have done
Sure.
it.
Right.
No,
No, but I
so
think
sure.
you,
No,
were,
that's
but you were also
undeniable.
making some points about because the other thing is that basically in a party that's very left and the strongest base is African Americans, the most loyal base, even more so than the Jewish vote, and that is you look at the big three. The big three are three white people.
But to your point about African American support for Joe Biden is rock solid.
Yes,
Yeah.
but again, can that change? I mean, by the time the campaign gets to South Carolina, which is where the black vote most frequently shows up in a significant way, I mean, will Booker be a viable candidate? I thought it was Booker's best position or best debate. I thought it was Kamala Harris's worst debate. And what is it? She was the belle of the ball for a while, and then she's just
She
you've
seemed
got-
giddy at times. Just it was kind of weird.
No, she's been propped up. She was propped up as a next darling in the Democrat Party and then has not really taken hold and then has gotten taken down by Tulsi Gabbard and by her own, I think, questionable performance in this most recent debate.
Yeah, she laughs a lot.
Yeah, weirdly.
Now let's I want to talk about another issue because this will be viewed by many listening to the program as perhaps being a sexist discussion, but I do want to bring it up because I think it's important since we have many female candidates, and that is whether or not men can get over a woman's voice to be the leader of the free world.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I think absolutely. I think that is unfortunately. No, I really do. I mean, you're laughing, Art, but I think
No,
it's a canard that's
I
why
agree with
Hillary
you.
Clinton
I
lost.
agree
Yeah,
with you.
right?
Yeah.
No, I think so. I mean, again, it's much more a political issue. Look, we have misogynists in this country. We have racists in this country. Those are absolutely factors, but
Yep.
I think the American people are ready. We were ready for an African American president. We're
Yep.
certainly ready for a woman
Right,
president.
yeah.
It's much more a factor
And
of
I
politics.
Elizabeth
and
Warren,
politics.
I think she has a very pleasant voice. She's smart. She's a smart cookie.
Very smart.
Don't count her out. But Bernie Sanders, you got to wake up and decide what's going to happen. Am I going to get one more chance at the brass ring, or am I going to be a kingmaker? Back shortly from Chicago.
We don't do a show about
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thanks very much for joining us. We've got a segment left, and I want to kind of bring something up that's not necessarily, on the front pages these days, although President Trump has talked about the homelessness situation in Los Angeles and San Francisco and throughout much of California, and has sent some advisors there to do some research to find out, what's gone wrong with the state of California, where homelessness appears to be way beyond the ability of government to deal with it. And I want to just get a general reaction. Is there a national response that we should have for the homelessness epidemic, do you believe, Nick?
Well, I think we have to be very concerned about many of the homeless. I mean, a lot of them are mentally ill. And unfortunately, and for good reasons, people were deinstitutionalized in the 1960s, and we haven't moved back towards really caring for mental illness in this country. That is a big issue, and a lot of the people that you see on the streets, if you're talking about as a national issue, California is a more complicated question because you've got a bit of a magnet going on. People are being attracted to those markets for weather, for social services, for other things. You've got a housing crisis because
It's all
of
the way
rent
up
control
the-
and
it's
all
all
of
the way
that.
up the
But I
Pacific
mean,
coast,
there's a
yeah.
lot more to it in California specifically, but that's also where it's at its biggest crisis point.
Josh?
I agree with Nick. It's a mental health problem. That's a big part of it. And for too long, mental illness has been stigmatized in this country, and I think we're now seeing it destigmatized somewhat, but we have more to go. And there needs to be a greater discussion and focus and resources devoted to mental health.
Absolutely.
Do you think that whenever there is a school shooting or a mass shooting, and the Republicans usually very quickly will talk about the important role of mental health, they put it before gun control, generally speaking.
Right.
Do you think that they are leading to a stigmatizing of people with mental disease?
I don't know if they're doing that. It concerns me when both sides, whenever there's a mass shooting, both sides get into their respective corners. The Republicans are talking about mental health, and the Democrats are talking about gun control and guns being the whole problem. So
But the Republicans and many Democrats are saying that if you have a mental illness of some kind, you should not have a gun. I think most people would agree with that.
Yes.
I'm just saying is that until the country has dealt with the stigma that is affixed to mental health, is that not a good idea? Do you have to have one discussion before the other? And the fact that because it's just gonna, then you're going to add them to the list of people who are homeless, and you just say, well, just half the country's crazy.
yeah,
I mean, am I overshooting this discussion?
I don't think there's a stigma, a widespread one, to mental illness. There was into the 20th century, but certainly since World War II, it's not been generally stigmatized. I think you're
I
right.
disagree.
I-
I very much disagree.
Yeah,
That is-
I do too.
that is, you can talk about on the internet, in public, on radio shows about all kinds of physical afflictions, but if you're talking about and the stigma and the ostracization that people face if they have mental illness is terrible in this country still. I think we've made some progress, to Josh's point. I think there's so much farther to go. I think
Interesting.
it's still a very serious issue. The stigma, and then the reluctance,
serious
the
issue.
reluctance of people. No, but the reluctance of people to seek treatment, and the reluctance of insurers to pay for
Yes.
treatment.
Yeah.
These are and policymakers to deal with it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, I suppose it depends on where you draw the line, where mental illness sort of begins, what's your threshold of defining mental illness. I'm kind of inclined to agree with Art on that, that it's not that stigmatizing. But on the other hand,
Not the way it used to be. You don't see poll evidence for that.
Yeah, it's hard to
which
know.
Is separate
On the
from-
other hand, your point about the obligation of insurance companies to come in and support, things like, marriage therapy. I mean, is this some sort of a mental illness issue? Probably not. So, some of the things might be it's easy to masquerade something as mental illness and sort of trot it into something that's subsidized. Maybe that's the kind of the danger you're looking at.
Is the treatment of mental illness in a variety of ways, in a variety of levels, whether it's at school or it's at local outposts in neighborhoods, is that an issue that could really be a bipartisan issue that could bring
it should
people
be.
It
together?
should be.
Yeah, I mean that's one like the crime bill that was signed last year
Yeah.
that kind of rolled back some of the Clinton Gingrich era reforms back in the mid 1990s. This is one. It really shouldn't be a partisan issue.
Right.
On the issue of the 1990s, is it fair for Joe Biden to be basically put on defense as to his leadership of some of the crime legislation and the 1,000 cops on the street and some of the other things that led to the Clinton anti-crime program, which was immensely popular with black and white elected officials? I mean, right now we have a Democratic Party that is not. Their arguments are not based on the context of what life was like politically
Right.
in 1994.
Right. It's fair for him to be asked those questions, but he's got a great comeback, and you just articulated the comeback. In the mid 90s, it was a different situation. Our cities were under siege. There was a lot bigger crime problem, and there was a reason that black leaders were begging for this. They wanted this, the crime reforms.
And no one was able to project the unintended consequences.
Right. But Biden hasn't been able to offer that up.
It's hard to remember the political zeitgeist of 20
Right.
years ago, and that's why, the Me Too movement can't understand the way male-female reactions and interactions were 40 years ago.
But that zeitgeist, as you talked about, that was Republicans, Democrats, white Republicans, black Democrats.
Right.
I mean, it was across the board. We had a major crime epidemic in the United States, and government rose to the occasion to do something about it. Now, I think they overstepped their bounds, but again, their intentions were good. So,
Yes.
and my intentions were good, inviting all of you here this evening. Nick Com, thank you very much. Josh Cantro, Art Sear, John McDonough, we thank you very much for being with us. Our thanks to Fritz Goldman and Andrew Marshall for their assistance in the production of this program. Until next week, I'm Bruce DuMont. Good night from Chicago.